Welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm going to tell you an incredibly dramatic story about an orphan girl who reincarnates into the world of a novel she once read. Katisha, only 10 years old, thought she would have a peaceful life with her beloved Grandpa Herson. But fate had other plans when he passed away, leaving her the entire massive fortune of the Blasco family, one of the most powerful noble houses in the empire. What's the problem? In the novel, the Blascos are the main villains, cruelly abusing the female lead. And what's even more terrifying, Katisha knows that the character with her same name in the story dies before turning 11. Can she change her fate, survive in this dangerous world, and uncover the dark secrets hidden within the Blasco family? Join me as we follow this thrilling survival journey. Katisha barely had strength in her hands or any stamina in general. When would this girl grow up, for heaven's sake? This way she could take better care of Grandpa Herson, who had been lying silently in bed for 5 years. He was a different person back then. Until she woke up in the body of Katisha Ainsley. In her past life, she was a poor orphan who died in a car accident. After her death, she was lucky enough to become a commoner in a famous novel. Here, she got a loving grandpa and a carefree childhood. Herson found her at the door of their house before Katisha remembered her past life. Grandpa always had a mischievous character and forced her to clean up suddenly like the heroine. She heard soft moans and ran toward the old man, slowly taking her hand. Herson was glad to know that his letter was sent. The old man was happy that Katisha stayed by his side in his final moments, shaking his head quickly. The girl didn't want to part from him at all. They still had to ride reindeer and go together to the summer festival. She decided that if she heard such nonsense again, Manhwa, she would take the house and steal everything. Grandpa didn't oppose, and decided he wouldn't find anyone better anyway later. In front of the coffin, the heroine remembered his last words about them seeing each other again. The neighbors agreed to help with the funeral, and after that, something had to be thought about, while Katisha was lost in thought. Some strange people approached her unexpectedly. Jimmy and Parker hurried to introduce himself. He was very happy to meet the young lady. Upon hearing he was the accountant for Duke Blasco, the protagonist froze in terror. He, along with the knights, came to collect the coffin and take care of the body of the late Duke Blasco. Realizing what was happening, the girl was shocked to see that Herson had hidden this news from her. But as it turned out, the old man had also left a will for her. Money, property rights, and much more would pass into Katisha's hands. So at the age of 10, she suddenly became a millionaire, which surprised and worried her since the protagonist was the only heir. Therefore, Jimmy hoped she would agree to visit the duchy, to see the spirit of the hero, and begin the inheritance process. Katisha knew that Duke Blasco was considered the best swordmaster, but his character was terrible in the novel. He was the main villain, who didn't consider his adopted daughter human. The protagonist Niella, so the girl decided to refuse him. Before it was too late, the accountant smiled and clarified that she would receive 1,000,000 gold in cash and 100,000 annually. Fed up with the poverty of her past life, Katisha packed her bags in an instant. She got ready to leave. Later in the carriage, she tried to think less about her lord's bad temper and more about the wealth. Plus, she was intrigued about which hero spirit the accountant had referred to earlier. It turned out to be the spirit of the very Herson, who was bound to a family relic hundreds of years ago. The first duke sealed the demon king in a sword, and the entire family began to guard it. Each head of the family gave up their soul to prolong the existence of the demonic blade and keep the demon sealed. So after death, the dukes become hero spirits and remain bound to the sword. This also meant that Katisha had the chance to see her grandpa again. She remembered he once mentioned 2 of his children, one of whom had died. The other, the old man had passed the title to and left to never see that stubborn one again. Now the girl didn't understand, did Herson not leave anything for the current duke? Hearing that it was so, she was horrified. This novel was the story of Niella's suffering, who was adopted by the Blasco family and treated like an animal. To save herself, she had to inherit the demonic sword, but the protagonist was very weak and simply fled seeking help from the White Cult, where she met the main male character, the half-breed, and Kayla. The worst part is that the novel ends abruptly just before the protagonists reconcile. Katisha's current situation is very similar to how Niella was made an adopted daughter. Remembering the humiliation she suffered, the protagonist shuddered. In her case, the best thing that could happen was being exiled. Suddenly, on the first day, she remembered that she could meet Herson, and that was a ray of hope. But, hearing that the spirit had to stabilize and wait 3 months, the heroine paled with fear. Moreover, the Blasco family controlled an army that was unmatched. Their resources and technology allowed them to create high-quality weapons that sold instantly. In the end, the Blasco family amassed so much wealth and power that even the emperor could do nothing, and now seeing their mansion in person, the heroine was deeply impressed. However, life was more valuable, and Katisha already imagined how she would plead for mercy from the duke on her knees. She was willing to give up the inheritance, but wanted to keep the little house where she lived with her grandpa. Jimmy took her to the office where the current Duke Ludius was already waiting. From the rumors, the heroine thought he was a muscular thug, but His Excellency was very handsome. Staring at her, the Duke didn't understand seriously. This girl caused all of this uproar. Katisha reacted and bowed as a greeting. Leutius should have allowed her to straighten her back, but instead he kept looking at her in silence. Knowing she was 10 years old, he sighed in irritation, not understanding what the old man fed her to make her look like a dried orange. Approaching the heroine, he wanted to see her face. The girl was too. Small and Jamian had to seat her at the table. The Duke came closer and examined her carefully, after which he decided that she was not a Blasco child. To begin with, he found out that Sir Herson really took pity on her and raised her. Hearing that, Lucius burst out laughing, considering it complete nonsense. Then he learned that the girl had no family other than that old man, and to top it off, Grandpa never mentioned inheritance nor left any documents. The heroine trembled with terror and didn't understand what this interrogation was about. Suddenly, His Excellency was interested in knowing if the name Gerst sounded familiar to her. Katisha knew that name belonged to the demon in the sword, but it was a secret. She didn't want to inherit the Blasco family relic at all. Lucius found it amusing. So how did she explain the contents of the will? Upon taking it from the Duke's hands and reading it, the heroine was stunned. His Excellency understood that the old man decided to bequeath the entire Blasco family to this little girl, and now he wanted to hear her opinion about the situation. In response, Katisha simply broke down in tears. Leutius was indignant and didn't understand which of the two should be crying. Jamian immediately took her side and reproached the Duke because the girl was adorable. The Duke was furious at such betrayal and didn't understand. Was the only thing that mattered tenderness? The accountant was sure of that, and His Excellency found nothing to object. He immediately ordered that they let him go, and Jamian hurried to accompany Lady Katisha to her chamber. Upon arriving at the room, he handed her a bag containing 50 gold coins. He also gave the girl a pendant from the previous Duke, which was also a pass to the bank vault. Moreover, the accountant hoped that Katisha wouldn't be upset about the Duke's words, for he was actually very kind, but the heroine was fine, because with money in hand, there was no problem. Alone, she thought that the issue now was the demonic sword. With it, you gain power, but at the cost of losing your mind and becoming a demon. That's why the owners of the sword last a maximum of 30 years and then die. Grandpa Herson was strong and didn't use the sword, which is why he lived so long, but Katisha was different, and hopefully she wouldn't drop dead in the first seconds with the sword. So the next day she went to see His Excellency and decided to reject the inheritance. Lucius greeted the redhead and knew this wouldn't be easy. Remembering that the will was certified, he tore it into pieces at once. The paper shone, and the document fully restored. The girl thought that this way she could accept everything, and then pass it on to someone else with a smile. The Duke reminded her that for that she had to die and become the next heroic spirit. Pleading through tears, the heroine hoped they wouldn't kill her. She was even willing to be a servant, and help with cleaning and carving apple swans. Lucius was stunned, and decided that to start it would be enough for her to pass a test. The conversation ended there, and offering her a grapefruit in the dining room, he threw the girl out of the office. At night in her bed, Katisha decided that her grandpa hated her. Later she looked at the pendant that contained her name and traces of her biological parents. Thinking back to Herson, the protagonist, felt tears streaming down her cheeks. At that moment, the pendant shone with an intense light, and a warm wave washed over her hands. In a second, she found herself inside a wooden box on a table. Peeking out, she saw a strange room, furnished with modern furniture from her past life. In the air above, a typewriter floated a peculiar screen. Suddenly, a phrase appeared suggesting she continue reading the novel from chapter 168. Katisha was very confused, since the last episode was 167. Observing the room once more, she realized she was in a space between worlds. If so, in the 10 years she lived in the novel, the author had surely written more chapters. The girl decided to quickly check the next episode and see what happened to Niella. The protagonist headed to the top of the hero's spirit tower to take the sword and save Akala. But at the end of the stairs was someone she didn't expect to see at all, and Cal extended the document and wanted to know if she knew Katisha Ainsley. Upon reading her name, the protagonist screamed in horror. But no matter how much she insisted the next episode didn't appear, Katisha decided to escape from that place. But there wasn't a single door. Thinking of leaving the way she came, she climbed back into the box. An instant later, she was back in the Blasco mansion's chamber. The new episode was crazy. Akala was inside the sword and couldn't be there after the protagonist visited that place hundreds of times. But the episode didn't appear, and rereading the old chapters, she understood the test the Duke mentioned. The members of the main and collateral Blasco family use it to choose a leader. Niella in the novel helped Lucius and accidentally resonated with the sword. After that, the family council forced her to take that test. In Katisha's case, the council would also decide, and they might not give the girl a chance. She felt a lot of tension over the similarity between her fate and the heroine's. Suddenly, Katisha thought that maybe she was a replacement for Niella. On the other hand, the protagonist would join this family in the fall, in 5 years. Putting aside thoughts of being a replacement, the girl returned to the Blasco mansion. Now she would have to wait 6 hours before she could re-enter that room. Katisha didn't understand why the protagonist was looking for her, but what she feared most was being able to become Daniela's enemy. After a while, she ordered 3 huge shinkalis from her personal chef. Seeing this, Leutius thought she felt too comfortable in his house. Dropping a hybrid, the protagonist remembered the will would soon be hers. The Duke was shocked by such audacity. The girl didn't truly understand if she should fear his excellency sitting across from her. Leutius thought he could take her money and kick her out. Katisha hurried to clarify that she had a delicate stomach and had to eat while ordering her to eat. The Duke didn't understand. The old man cooked for her. Instead of responding, he recalled Grandpa's stories about their family fights. Seeing the gloomy look on His Excellency's face, Katisha immediately lost her appetite. She simply saw how lonely the Duke was, without family to forget him, and didn't understand why Lucius hadn't visited him even once. However, the Duke himself thought it was the old man who abandoned the Blasco family and him. The protagonist decided that His Excellency had nothing to worry about since she would leave at the first opportunity. Lucius was confused and didn't understand where his ambitions had gone. However, to Katisha from the beginning, the country house of her grandpa was enough for her. The Duke was surprised since he considered that house a shed, where hardly anyone fit. Seeing the serious face of the girl, he laughed and was glad that she stopped being afraid of him. The protagonist, for her part, was in shock at the smile on his face. It even scared her a little that no one in that house had hit her until now. Leutius was astonished, since he wasn't used to mistreating children. Katisha felt relieved, but knew that if she failed the test, everything could change. Moreover, a side branch of the family immediately offered to take care of her. The girl sincerely hoped that His Excellency would give her the opportunity to take the test. The Duke remembered that in the council the last word was always held by the closest relatives. Besides Leutius, the direct descendants of Blasco were his sons, Werner and Arnon. If Katisha manages to convince them in 2 weeks, the Duke would also help her. If it was enough for the hero's spirit to awaken, they could change the contents of the inheritance. Inspired by these words, the girl decided to work hard and get permission for the test, wielding the fork with combativeness. She began to devour the King Kali. Lucius approached and tapped her cheek with his finger while he pinched her cheeks. Katisha didn't understand what was happening. After laughing, the Duke considered her extremely ugly. He also decided to clarify that his son should return to the mansion in about 3 days. In the novel, they appeared halfway. The heroine didn't expect to see them so soon. Werner and Arnon had terrible characters worse than the Duke's. The young man organized sword fights with Niela to mock her. His brother always looked on indifferently and forced the protagonist to clean. Meanwhile, Lucius thought that Katisha was quite brave and intelligent for her age. He also understood that maybe the old man hadn't been wrong in his choice. Calling the accountant, he ordered him to protect the girl from Werner and Arnon's pranks. At that moment, the protagonist heard an explosion and saw the main door of the mansion in ruins. Hiding behind a column, she saw the Duke's sons enter. Arnon was delighted with the reinforcement of the spell her brother had cast, but Werner saw no other option, since she was huffing and pulling on the knob hard. The sister smiled and decided to clarify that she usually kicked the doors open. Dragging the man by the neck, the brother thought she should learn to use her hands. The captured man turned out to be a spy for the imperial family Recap Manhwa, and Werner immediately handed him over to the knights. Meanwhile, Katisha was horrified that they had returned 3 days earlier than expected. The servants hurried to receive their masters, whom the Duke was already waiting for in his office with a heavy sigh. Werner decided to take a bath first. One of the servants wanted to clarify that His Excellency wished to see them nothing, more upon arrival giving him a threatening look. Werner didn't want to repeat it twice. Arnon, for her part, decided to work in the kitchen first, and then see her father. The servants had no choice but to bow silently before those idiots. Katisha understood that if she went to them without a plan, they would crush her immediately. Running down the hallway, she decided that the first thing was to gather information. The door in front of her opened and Bernard suddenly came out of there. The heroine was paralyzed with terror, while the young master didn't understand why she didn't come in to see him. He wanted the girl to prepare the bath and bring the towels. At first, this situation seemed very strange to Katisha, but suddenly she remembered that when Niela came to the Blasco house, Werner forced her to clean for the slightest fault in the cleaning. The young master immediately punished the protagonist. Looking at the clock, the girl realized that 30 seconds had passed since his order. Fortunately, she had no rival in cleaning. After a few minutes, everything was ready in the best way. Going to take a bath, Werner ordered the protagonist to clean the room, knowing she had about 20 minutes. Katisha decided to show all her skills. Later, sitting on the couch, the young master looked thoughtfully around. He was impressed by the speed and quality of the cleaning as well as the bravery of the girl. Katisha didn't expect that reaction. It took Anila 5 years to achieve it, knowing that she lived in the mansion for 4 days. Werner thought the heroine must have already encountered that scammer. They spoke of a commoner who in one night took 2/3 of the Blasco assets, which meant she wasn't mocking Katisha, but had truly mistaken her for a maid. The young master wanted to know what the girl knew about the scammer. Above all, the heroine understood that confessing right now was unthinkable. Meanwhile, Bernard considered the scammer a mere snake without ambition. And if the contract couldn't be destroyed, it meant they had to deal with the heiress. Upon hearing his words, Katisha could barely contain a scream. At that moment, the Duke's son decided to send the young maid to secretly spy on the scammer. Struggling to hold herself back, the protagonist thought it was too much for a child, but Werner trusted his choice. She was the only one who could handle 10 minutes of chatter, so the idea of revealing her identity went down the drain. That's why Katisha decided to build at least a trust relationship master and servant. Sometime later, the Duke's bodyguard was with Jamian in front of the office. Running toward them, the protagonist wanted to greet the Duke. The servants were moved by such concern for their excellency. Meanwhile, Lucius was sitting reviewing documents. Katisha felt lonely having breakfast alone and hoped to share the meal with the Duke. Kit supported her, remembering that his lord always dined in the office. The accountant also supported the heroine, which moved her quite a bit. However, Leodius didn't have time to eat right now, just after the chef appeared and thought the lord despised his work. Then the Duke realized he had no allies left in that house. In the end, Katisha's dream of having breakfast together came true, even though Leotius was looking at documents the whole time. Suddenly, he was curious to know how the conquest of Werner and Arnold's trust was going. He decided to clarify that the heroine should only go to see them accompanied by adults. Katisha decided to remain silent for now, having been mistaken for a maid. In case of danger, she could always run straight to His Excellency for rescue. Breakfast ended, and he already wanted to return to his affairs. Later, the protagonist met the maid Margaret. She told her that the young master was in the training center, but Werner trained very aggressively. Going there was dangerous, so Margaret decided to accompany her if the young lady insisted. Upon arrival, Katisha felt pain from the blue energy that floated in the air. Suddenly, there was an explosion, and the heroine appeared in the arms of the maid, jumping very high. Margaret moved at lightning speed to the other side. It turned out that all the servants could do that, or they wouldn't survive. Meanwhile, Arnon was struggling hard against the blows from her older brother. Werner considered her completely useless, and they started to argue. Margaret hurried to cover the young girl's ears. 3 years ago, Arnon was a great swordmaster equal to her brother. But one day she broke her right shoulder, and since then, the gap between them grew. That's why the young lady learned blacksmithing, to compensate for the injury strengthening the sword. Even now, Katisha saw that Arnon truly enjoyed the fight and attacked with everything, although she barely stood up and could only manage to block. Werner knew nothing about the injury and constantly criticized his sister. Everyone except the Duke knew about it, but they remained silent by Arnon's own order. Katisha was confused, since this misunderstanding only increased family tension. The older brother kept criticizing with disdain Arnon's strength and skill, but Arnon clung to the idea that all her failures were due to bad luck. It was rumored that their relationship was the cruelest in the family, and now the heroine understood why. Although the training had ended, Margaret thought the young lady should wait a little longer before seeing the young master recap Manhwa. Then Katisha decided to see Arnon. But the maid shook her head. The heroine only wanted to take a look at the young lady to see how she was, even from afar. Margaret was moved by such concern and agreed to help. Later, they saw how Arnon brusquely rejected the doctor. Her shoulder looked stiff, and her face was pale, but despite everything, the doctor was forced to leave the fearsome young lady. It would be difficult to see each other now, so the maid wanted to know what else the heroine wanted to do. Upon hearing that she could stroll through the savannah, the girl was terrified. Instead, she decided to go shopping. Margaret began to review the best toy stores and bakeries in the city, but Katisha planned to go to the pharmacy for herbs. Before, she didn't understand why her grandpa taught her to make potions, but now, thanks to that, she had the opportunity to win Arnon's favor. The herb seller warmly welcomed the young buyer, putting on a face of utmost importance. Katisha decided to buy several shelves at once. That night, Jamian brought the Duke a report on the invitation sent. He sincerely hoped that one day they would double his salary for such hard work. Leodius was perplexed to learn that Naranja went to the city today. Getting up from the table, he decided to go breathe some fresh air. Looking out the window and seeing several carts loaded near the entrance, the Duke was completely amazed. Waiting for the servants to unload the huge bags of herbs, Katisha began to work. After many hours, she didn't even realize how dawn broke. During breakfast, Leodius felt curious to know what the protagonist had been busy with yesterday. He didn't expect him to already know about her purchase. She pretended that yesterday during the fight, she noticed that Arnon had gotten hurt. The Duke's reaction was so abrupt that it even flustered him. Katisha hurried to clarify that she had prepared a healing ointment as a gift. From His Excellency's face, it was evident that he also wanted a gift. But the heroine had prepared herself and offered the Duke a revitalizing potion. Leodius was confused and thought it was an infusion or an herbal tea, but it turned out to be a super coffee that would leave you euphoric for a week. In silence, taking the girl in his arms, the Duke took her out of the office. Katisha immediately decided to go see the young lady Arnon. At that moment, she was sitting near her forge holding her sore shoulder. The treatment couldn't be delayed, as this could cause problems. Katisha bravely approached the girl, who immediately jumped up. Bowing to her, the protagonist extended the herbal medicine. Arnon was stunned and hesitant when taking the gift. Suddenly, she realized she had never seen that girl before. Only one person could have appeared recently in the mansion, and it was that rat from the will. The protagonist responded with a bold look and introduced herself. The girl, meanwhile, tried the gifted ointment, which instantly eliminated the pain. Upon hearing her gratitude, Katisha felt a little encouraged. Arnon didn't understand why the girl looked at her like prey to her predator. The protagonist decided to remind her that she couldn't give up the inheritance even if she wanted to. But the girl simply dismissed it, since Gerst wouldn't be hers anyway. But the Blasco vault held many rare materials and relics, and Arnon was willing to do anything to obtain that vault. The protagonist instantly caught on that it was time for a deal. The girl had to side with Katisha and help her overcome the test. The protagonist, in exchange, would invest the inheritance in Arnon as her protector. When she accesses the vault, she could give the girl everything she needs. Arnon was deeply bewildered by such a proposal. If the vault goes to her father, in the end, she would have to share it with her brother. Hearing that the girl already had a contract, Lady Blasco doubted her age. But upon seeing hearts on the paper, she understood it was just a game. But the heroine immediately proposed to certify it notarially through the legal department management and the magic office. In the novel, Arnon opened her workshop after 5 years, but the items there didn't attract much attention. Because of this, her character became harder, but Katisha was no longer sure she could trust the original in person. The Duke and his son seemed like different people from the ones in the book. In the mansion, everyone was kind, and it was incomprehensible. Did Niella also get along with them? At night, Werner was upset because the brat had come to see him so late. The boy hurt his leg in a fight with his sister, and the heroine decided they should be kinder to each other. Werner reacted aggressively, thinking that in a fight with Arnon, one couldn't let their guard down, for even a second. However, it was evident he thought a lot about his sister. The young master didn't understand why lately. His sister had become less sincere with him. Moreover, he planned to challenge the Duke after defeating Arnon. But with that leg, it was impossible. Katisha was very surprised that he didn't call His Excellency father. Seeing that Werner was uncomfortable, she decided to drop that topic for now. Instead, she remembered that she was adopted. But she was lucky to meet someone very good. The boy smiled and thought that if she met a good man, she must be good too. Meanwhile, Leutius was perplexed by Margaret's words. Feeling and even seeing the flow of mana is extremely difficult, even after years of training. However, Katisha could see Berner's aura at just 10 years old. Moreover, she surpassed her own children in many aspects when they were her age. For example, she was agile and could hide her presence even from strong swordsmen like Bernard and Arnold. Leutius faced for the first time a genius of her caliber. To start, he decided to try to find information about her biological parents. On the other hand, what if she were a spy for the imperial family? The Duke was indignant that his servants and children fell so easily for that scammer's cute face. Margaret smiled and decided to remind him that the master had already had breakfast 5 times with her. The next day, the heroine learned from Margaret that soon there would be a Blasco family meeting starting just after the arrival of the old Gespa, who is Gerson's younger brother. Katisha was shocked at how quickly events were unfolding. She was still not ready to confess to Bernard, but it seemed there was no other option. So she made several apple swans and took them to the young master. Werner was amazed at how skillfully she transformed a simple apple. He decided that it definitely was worth raising her salary now. The protagonist noticed that he was reading a book on imperial politics. She knew what interested him and decided to lend him a hand. Finding the right book, she extended it to Werner with an impassive face. The boy was surprised he hadn't thought of looking for answers in that book. Upon hearing that the protagonist read it a year ago, he became deeply confused. Gathering her courage, Katisha decided to confess everything at once. At that moment, Margaret entered and invited the young lady to lunch. Werner was even more confused and didn't understand who they were talking about. The maid approached the protagonist and looked confused at the Duke's son, happy to introduce the young lady. Lady Katisha Ainsley, the main heir of the late Duke's will. The blue and sweaty protagonist tried to explain the situation and felt that horrible and blue aura emanating from the young master. In turn, Werner was red as a tomato from the embarrassment of having shared so much personal information. The girl in tears hurried to justify herself because she simply feared for her life. What confused Bernard the most was that she still called him young master. Katisha addressed him by name, suddenly making him shiver without understanding anything. The protagonist decided to call him her brother. The entire universe in Werner's consciousness crumbled in the futility of his existence. He grabbed her under the arm and quickly headed toward his father. Lucius was perplexed by the sudden appearance of his son, and without calling Werner, extended Katisha, to him not understanding why the Duke had remained silent all this time. Upon seeing the girl's dress, Lucius thought she looked like a rainbow. The protagonist stood up and hurried to clarify that it was a gift from her grandpa. She wore it because she missed Herson so much. The Duke nodded while his son looked at both of them in astonishment. Lucius didn't understand why his son was so worried. Still confused, Werner agreed that the dress was great, but what surprised him the most was that at her age, she had already read political literature. Katisha didn't understand what was special about it according to her grandpa. Only the ignorant didn't know this. Upon hearing this, Leutius became even more confused since that knowledge was imparted at the academy. At her age, she had already read political literature. Katisha didn't understand what was so special according to her grandfather. Only the ignorant didn't know this. Upon hearing this, Lucius was even more confused since that knowledge was taught in middle and high school. If we add to this the other talents of the little girl, the old man clearly didn't choose her at random. The Duke remembered that Gespa would arrive soon, so the girl had to prepare. Upon hearing the name of the oldest and most influential figure of the Blasco family, Katisha was horrified. After that, Werner didn't make a single sound, which was a bit unsettling. Margaret decided to clarify that Gespa was even friendlier than her older brother. And so after several hours, the protagonist found herself in front of the entrance to the meeting. She barely opened it a little. As soon as she felt the door, she immediately sensed dozens of burning gazes on her. The atmosphere felt more like a trial than a family gathering. Arnon welcomed the girl with a warm smile, which was very encouraging. But as soon as Katisha sat in her place, she heard grumbles directed at her. Many family members openly mocked her and showed complete disdain upon hearing that they also doubted the sanity of the elder Herson. The heroine couldn't take it anymore. She decided that they had no right to those reproaches since they didn't even bother to visit the sick elder. Katisha didn't understand how disgusting her relatives must be for the Duke to leave the inheritance to a 10-year-old girl. Uncle Chen was furious to see that she dared to insult the adults. The heroine thought they would punish her for offending the nobility. The Duke raised his hand and asked Chen to calm down and sit. Then he smiled at Katisha and decided that they should put emotions aside. The assembly officially began, and the girl respectfully greeted everyone present. Mr. Gespa was presiding from above, scratching his beard with an important air. Judging by the will, Herson remained firm in his intentions. Therefore, the elder didn't understand if this was a punishment for them, or if his older brother had lost his mind. Chen jumped from his seat and remembered how furious Herson was when Liot died 11 years ago. Werner was furious at his words and ordered that no topics unrelated to the assembly be touched. Lucius hurried to remind that the will could be declared null in 2 cases. Either the spirit of the hero Herson, upon awakening, would change the heir himself, or the current pretender would die with a malicious smile. Chen didn't understand what they were waiting for. Looking at him with disgust, Arnon decided they were not beasts, capable of executing an innocent girl. Gespa agreed with her and thought a man should watch his words. At that moment, the Duke remembered that besides those 2 decisions, there was another one. With a smile, he turned to Katisha and decided to propose that she be part of the Blasco family. The protagonist was in shock. If they hadn't agreed to any of that, the elder wanted to hear the Duke's explanations first. They couldn't just take and give Katisha the Blasco inheritance, but they could change her last name. Chen jumped from his seat again and began shouting at Liut because she was going to be the girl, the direct heir of the family. His son Sibyl supported his father and considered the protagonist a mere plebeian with an unknown lineage. Gespa agreed with them and believed that the Duke didn't understand the weight of the Blasco heir status. Lucius and his children were the high nobility of Astraca, and the girl would only get the last name of a distant and collateral family, recap Manhwa. But the Duke decided to name her the direct heir because he wanted to raise her himself. The little girl didn't seem problematic and had already shown she had no hidden motives. However, before deciding, he wanted to hear his own children's opinions. Arnon immediately supported her father without a second thought. Werner, on his side, looked very serious with his gaze fixed on a point. Suddenly, he decided he would follow the will of his lord. Now that the 3 direct heirs agreed, Katisha had to decide. Gespa decided to intervene and speak with the girl personally. Upon descending to see her, she wanted to know if the girl knew the magnitude of the inheritance, which includes the necessary funds every month that the whole family uses. Right now, everything is locked in the vault, and only the legitimate heir can access it because of this all. Family businesses have been left without funding. Therefore, to accept Katisha into the family, the elder wanted to ensure she wouldn't betray them, and there was no better way to test her than to submit her to the Blasco family heir test. The protagonist straightened her back and accepted aloud. Her test would be similar to the evaluation for the head of the family position and would include 4 tasks. The 3 direct lines supported this initiative. After this, the Duke gave Katisha a declaration to sign, committing herself to perform the test honestly. Upon leaving the meeting room, the girl immediately saw Margaret. The maid hurried to encourage the young lady and wanted to take her to Mr. Kit Jimian's office, and the chef also came to give her support. Katisha decided to give her all, so that her support wouldn't be in vain. Everyone began to cheer, thinking a test wouldn't pose any danger. Moved by their concern, the girl burst into tears, and her face became very swollen, which greatly bewildered the Duke upon seeing her. The protagonist decided to clarify that they hadn't agreed, that he would raise her. She didn't understand the reason for this, as she thought he didn't like her. Lucius thought it wasn't important since the test was the easiest way to fulfill his father's will and reclaim the Blasco assets. However, Katisha was worried that if she obtained the last name Blasco, the Duke would become her dad. Above all, Lucius didn't consider her his daughter at all. He thought that now, the grandfather was more necessary for her than her father. But the Duke also wanted to adopt her because she seemed interesting to him. Too many secrets and enigmas floated around this little girl. But Katisha couldn't relax, because Lucius didn't plan to replace the grandfather. What did the grandfather think by betting on this shameless uncle Katisha didn't understand? Jumping from her seat, the Duke took her in his arms and headed to the balcony. Opening the door, he showed the girl the nighttime beauty of the vast grounds of the mansion, reminding her of her new companions and family. The heroine felt how much she wanted to live here. At that moment, she made the decision to go all the way. The next morning, Katisha prepared for her first task. Arnon was delighted to see the fighting spirit in the young heir's eyes. Sybil waited near the carriage and greeted the girl mockingly. It turned out that he had been named supervisor to watch over Lady Ainsley and ensure her good behavior. He began to provoke her about everything and decided that the girl was too spoiled. He believed that her behavior was severely damaging the reputation of Blasco laughing in her face. Katisha didn't understand how he had become so cultured in a single night. Moreover, his vulgar words cast doubt on the chivalry spirit of Blasco. At that moment, the Duke approached and was very surprised that that guy was in his carriage. Sybil hurried to justify himself, saying he had been assigned as the girl's supervisor. However, that didn't give him the right to even approach the main family carriage. As he rushed out of the carriage, the boy apologized and tried to drag the heroine. Only direct descendants travel in it. Werner was furious. It seemed he was going to execute Sybil right there. In the future, Katisha could leave home or even become the heir, so they had to treat her as such. When passing by Chen's son towards the carriage, Arnon didn't understand who that guy was or what he was doing. There, Sybil was shocked that she didn't even recognize him. At that moment, the heroine understood the power of direct descendants, and their carriage traveled 100 meters before teleporting directly to the capital. The girl's first test was to open the grandfather Herson's vault in the central bank. The problem was that only the owner, who had already passed away, knew how to open it. Arnon wondered how secure Katisha was in her success. The protagonist knew that her grandfather must have left clues. At worst, she would enter the pendant space, where time stops to think. Upon entering the huge building of the central bank, Katisha was impressed by its scale. There were magical dolls everywhere doing almost all the work. One of those employees accepted the Duke's request to visit the Blasco family vault. After identification, everyone had to hand over their weapons from the clothes of the Duke's children, who weren't happy, began to drop swords and daggers. The protagonist was surprised by the number of weapons they had and understood that no one would dare attack the Blasco family. Besides, they have a tense relationship with the imperial family, so more caution must be exercised. Soon after, the protagonists found themselves in front of the vault entrance. A stone statue of a monster over the door terrified the girl. The Blasco ancestors gave their lives to seal that beast in stone. The Duke decided that now, Katisha must defeat the gargoyle and avoid mortal injuries. Werner and Arnon wouldn't be able to help her, because their weapons were confiscated upon entering. Knowing that it would swallow her whole, Katisha decided to give up. Instantly stroking her head, Lucius hurried to clarify that it was just a simple stone statue. His children could barely contain their laughter upon seeing the girl. The real challenge was finding a way to open the door. For that, they had to enter a password into some special gears. Below there was a hint about where it all began. Arnon recalled that it was a text from the commemorative Psalms to the spirit of Blasco. But something altered. Katisha felt something strange, as if that text was incredibly familiar to her. And now whoever opens the vault will have the right to enter and change the conditions of the lock, in addition to becoming its rightful owner. Just after those words, the atmosphere around her changed drastically. The girl ran towards the gears and entered the combination, but she got it wrong. At that instant, the statue made a movement and its eyes lit up with a crimson color. Werner recognized the spell and understood that if they gave more incorrect answers, they would have a really hard time. Arnon exploded and decided that if she was so smart, she should try it herself. Upon hearing it could be a date, Sybil trembled violently. Running towards the gears with a frantic look, he began to input the combination. But his answer turned out to be wrong again. The monster's pose changed, and the magical formula to attack was almost complete. Blinded by greed, Sybil began entering another combination. After another failure, the statue seemed almost alive. Werner hit his relative with all his might in the nose, sending him flying to the side. Arnon didn't understand how he dared to intervene and furiously hit the boy. Judging by the magical formula, they only had one attempt left. The girl felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders for getting them into this situation. Katisha thought at that moment that if the grandfather had bequeathed the vault to her, she was the one who could open it. Surely this was related to her present, and it was unlikely to have anything to do with the Psalms. Suddenly she remembered and began to hum a lullaby from her childhood, the one Herson often sang. At that moment she thought the starting place for her grandfather was his hometown. Herson believed it was better to be where one should be, to return to where it all began, after returning home. She almost immediately found the heroine and she became his new beginning. In this way, the farewell song to the spirits of the heroes transformed into her new lullaby. As she approached the gear, Katisha was sure she knew the correct answer. The others were worried since this was the last chance. However, as soon as she entered the combination, the gargoyle returned to its place, and the vault doors began to open. Slowly behind them revealed a true door leading to the strongbox. The heroine remembered that she had brought her grandfather's key. After the second door, a dense darkness stretched impenetrably to the view. Trusting blindly in her grandfather, Katisha ventured forward without hesitation. As soon as she took a few steps, she found herself amidst shining golden mountains. Besides the gold, there were exceptional gems and valuable ancestral relics. The protagonist could barely assimilate that all this treasure now belonged to her. Now she finally understood the uproar that the family inheritance had caused. Suddenly, the vault key vibrated and her grandfather's name began to fade. Upon pronouncing his name, a list appeared, confirming that all the assets were hers. The list included all the monetary capital of Blasco and information from the last decade. Surely there will be someone who will try to annihilate her to take her fortune. The protagonist was ready to stay, there for life, but they were waiting outside. Meanwhile, the Duke and his children were very worried. Arnon didn't understand what the significance of the successful combination was. Ludius, for his part, guessed it was the date when the elder found Katisha. It was logical, since it turned out that no one could know that date, except the protagonist herself. The Duke remembered how his father sang the same lullaby to him when he was a child. Could it be that the elder planned everything and helped this girl solve the mystery? At that instant, the protagonist emerged from the vault, taking some mementos with her. Approaching the battered Sibyl, she hoped to have passed the test. Upon receiving confirmation, she jumped for joy. After that, she went into the bank office to obtain the financial reports from the last 34 years. The term was extensive, so the procedure would take about 2 weeks. After thanking the dolls, she left the bank with her new family and her pockets full. All the way Arnon couldn't believe that the girl had left that gargoyle as a guard in the capital. Margaret received that heroine and immediately proposed to store the treasure memories in a safe, thanking the maid. Katisha kissed her on the cheek and decided to thank her friends more often later. Already in bed, the heroine felt how tired she was. In the lyrics of the lullaby, there was a strange detail, suggesting that the grandfather didn't leave his hometown alone, but that would be known when they reunited. Now there was something more important. Moving to the room with the book, Katisha left the memories in the corner. This place was much more comfortable and safer than any safe. Unfortunately, the new chapter had not yet appeared. Reviewing her treasures once again, the heroine suddenly saw something she had to take back. Grabbing an elegant bastard sword, she dragged it with both hands toward the box. The blade looked light, but it turned out to be quite heavy. Back at the house in the capital, she stood in front of the mirror and decided to wield the sword a bit. Being nearby by chance, Arnon was bewildered by what she saw and started yelling at the girl, because it was very dangerous to wield a sword without a sheath. Katisha hurried to clarify it was a gift for the young lady. Upon taking the sword and examining it, Arnon recognized the legendary weapon missing from the continent. Years ago, upon signing the contract with the heroine, the Duke's daughter would acquire a collection of masterpieces, gems, and magical water. Arnon was very confused and truly didn't understand. She wouldn't care about the girl. Katisha knew that the young lady was someone close to her grandfather, and that's why she was so generous. Setting the sword aside, Arnon tightly hugged her little sister. The heroine in turn was sincerely happy that her friendship with the Duke's daughter had strengthened. Later, Katisha discovered that they couldn't return to the mansion. Immediately when local nobility visits the capital, it is essential to meet the emperor. However, Her Majesty's family and Marquis Orgien, her blood relative on her mother's side, distrust Blasco a lot. It was logical, since the Duke had influence in politics, business, and even the military. No matter what happened, the Blasco family was always loyal to the imperial family. Margaret recalled that harmony in the imperial family was broken when Lord Lude suddenly died. The maid realized she had said something she shouldn't. The protagonist only knew about Lute, who was the second son of the Duke, and Lucius's younger brother. If the Blasco family really fell into the traps of the imperial family, and the Marquis that explains their hostility towards them, then Katisha decided to find out what kind of person Lute was. It turned out he was a top-notch and brilliant prosecutor besides having a strong, brotherly relationship with the Duke. Margaret hoped the girl would smile more often, since her smile reminded her of her lord's deceased brother. Meanwhile, the Duke and his sons dressed up to go see the Emperor. The protagonist approached and smiled at Ludius with all her strength. The Duke thought she wanted something since she was smiling like a fool. In any case, he wanted the orange not to cause problems and to truly have fun with her smile. It even reminded him a bit of Katisha's grandfather. When they left, she felt loneliness inside. However, she also had plans, and the first was to go see the capital. Margaret decided to give her Rosa, her subordinate, and a very talented person as a companion. The walk through the capital was excellent, except for one moment. Sybil constantly followed him, fulfilling his duties as a supervisor. Katisha had the feeling that while he was around, something was going to happen. Suddenly, she heard people around her murmuring about her. The heroine was perplexed, since her information was ultra-secret. Upon seeing mercenaries, Margaret took the young lady to a safe place, determined to investigate. She left the girl in Rosa's care when suddenly, someone attacked the girl from behind. While Rosa defended herself, Katisha was in shock. What should she do? The girl heard Sybil's voice, and in an instant she was grabbed. Time later, she woke up in a dark carriage among boxes. First, she decided to calm down and think a bit. If the rumors reached the capital, someone from the Blasco family leaked them. The kidnappers took Katisha's money bag and the vault key. Apart from the closest relatives of Blasco, there's only one person who knows how to open the treasure with that key. Most likely, Chen and Sybil hired mercenaries. Taking out her pendant, the protagonist teleported to a room with a book. Among her memories was a dagger that she didn't hesitate to take, freeing herself from the ropes. She decided to find out who did this and tear them apart. It was unknown how much time had passed since she lost consciousness. Before the kidnapper's carriage stopped, she had to save herself alone. Meanwhile, the Duke with his children walked through the imperial palace. Suddenly, someone called him by name, which greatly angered Ludius. Marcus Organ was glad to see him for the first time in a long time. Everyone knew that without the Emperor's grace, he wouldn't even lift his head before Blasco. 11 years ago, an unfortunate accident ended Lyud's life. There were no proof or witnesses, but everyone knew that the imperial family and the Marquis plotted it. Werner was furious at Organ's insolence, but suddenly his father ordered them to return to the carriage alone. With him, he politely greeted Marcus Organ, who thought the Duke should better teach his children to conduct business. Lucius decided to take charge himself and was annoyed because the Marquis was meddling again, squeezing his hand firmly. The Duke didn't understand how the old man dared to call him by name. Confused by his lord's stern gaze, Organ hurried to apologize. Moreover, the Marquis should no longer send his people secretly to the Blasco Duchy to avoid misunderstandings. Lucius wanted to leave, but then Organ recalled a strange rumor about a child. The Duke should be cautious. Who knows what could happen? What danger? Lucius was amazed at how quickly the rumors ran, and was very alarmed. Outside, Arnon caught up with him, fleeing from Margaret and Rosa with terrible news. Sybil threw himself at his feet, trying to explain that he had done everything possible with the sword in his face. The Duke ordered an immediate search. Meanwhile, the escape failed, and they dragged the heroine toward a building. It turned out to be a place for gladiators and an illegal slave auction. In a matter of minutes, the poor girl was already behind bars. What horror! In the original novel, Neela also ended up here and fought as a gladiator. Anyway, Katisha had the dagger, and as soon as the guard left, they had to escape. At that instant, 2 guards brought in a boy, taking him by the arms and throwing him into the cage. The bandits didn't understand why he still hadn't taken his divine form. Upon hearing that, they could get a lot at the auction for that mixed blood. The heroine was shocked. When the guards left, she decided to check the boy's condition, cutting the lock with the magical dagger. She ran toward him without hesitation, carefully examining his face. She recognized the protagonist of the novel, in which he was the divine beast, and Cal, the owner of the sacred sword. She didn't understand who she was. This character was Katisha's favorite, and she didn't expect to see him. It was evident that his body was recovering, and the scratches were simply disappearing. Assuring his support would make escaping much easier. First, she wanted to know how long he had been there, Manhwa. Shouldn't the divine beast be in the church? Cal tensed up suddenly. How could she know that the heroine clarified that his healing power could only come from the White Cult? That organization protects the sacred sword of Heli, and its members regenerate. Ikal had been raised since childhood as the master of the sacred sword and guardian of the church. Suddenly, Katisha realized how she could catch a big fish from the White Cult. The young man didn't understand. Did she also work there? Unable to explain anything, the heroine heard footsteps and quickly hid in her cage. It turned out to be the girl who brought food to Ikal. From her words, Katisha understood it was already nighttime, so Blasco would hesitate to find her today. The heroine decided not to stay still and pretended her leg hurt a lot. The stranger was very surprised, since there were no medicines there. In any case, she decided to check what was wrong with the girl's leg. Upon noticing that the lock was broken, she was bewildered. Katisha at that moment handed her a gold coin and decided that if the girl helped her, she would make her rich. Moreover, the heroine hastened to clarify that her father was Blasco, so this place was already doomed. Upon hearing the Duke's last name, the girl paled abruptly, also reminding her of the sheet of Artem. The heroine ultimately convinced the stranger. A little later, the negotiations ended, although the girl only agreed to free her tomorrow night. Before the gladiator arena opened, it would be empty, and the stranger would leave the door open. The next night, Katisha opened Ikal's cell during her escape, hoping he would follow her. but the boy remained seated in his place and seemed very calm. It turned out he found it amusing to be there, not understanding anything and rejoicing at their encounter. The protagonist prepared to leave. Suddenly, Akal wanted to go with her. He saw no difference between this place and the cult. Katisha was surprised, since the white cult was a fair and honest place where absolute good is preached. When Akal releases his power, the temple receives a signal and they can easily track him. The protagonist was shocked to see the tactics of the sacred temple. The young man hoped the girl would help him escape from this place. Katisha wanted to know exactly where he wanted to go. If he managed to flee, Akal decided to follow her without hesitation. The heroine was confused and didn't understand why he suddenly wanted that. Aware of the gravity, she preferred to refuse, citing lack of money. But the young man already knew she was noble and had heard her talk with the chief. Believing that Katisha had tricked the girl, he was going to shout at her. The protagonist suddenly covered his mouth. Akal thought that she might buy him. The girl was surprised and didn't want to have anything to do with the white cult. Blasco and the cult, by the way, got along terribly. If the Duke hides the owner of the sacred sword, something terrible will happen. So Katisha couldn't take him with her in any way. As she walked toward the door, she heard a pitiful meow behind her. Turning back to the prisoner, she saw a small and adorable kitten sitting where the boy had been a giant snow leopard. That was Akal's true form. But right now he was just a kitten and looked very cute. The divine beast began to pose, provoking an overdose of cuteness in the girl. She couldn't resist and accepted to buy him, touching his little paws. She knew she was changing the canon, but there was no turning back. Meanwhile, Werner and Arnon watched in fear the rage of their father, pointing the sword at the wounded opponent. The Duke demanded an answer. In the end, the bandit had no choice but to reveal where they took the girl. But even under torture, they couldn't find out the identity of the client, who left them a small advance. It was evident that the imperial family was not behind this rite. Not understanding who dared to go so far, the Duke ordered everyone to head to the gladiator arena. Sometime later, the girl guided Katisha toward the exit. However, the girl couldn't leave alone and had to take Akal with her. To achieve this, she planned to present herself at the auction. The protagonist handed a handful of coins to a stranger to pay her participation in the bid. As soon as the duel begins, the auction will open instantly. If you try to remove the chains from a slave without the key, they will release deadly poison. Katisha also received a magic tablet that records the bid offered. The girl immediately showed how to access the auction and where the emergency exit was. Meanwhile, the first fighter was released in the arena, and Cal, for his part, received a kick in the butt and rolled onto the platform. The heroine was furious and didn't understand how they dared to treat a child like that. Standing tall, the young man calmly walked toward his opponent. Not long before all this, she wanted the fight to end quickly. For that, she had to release her power. But then the cult members would appear. The heroine saw no problem, and Cal would easily crush them. Moreover, if he chooses Katisha, she will be his personal bodyguard. Now the young man stopped the opponent's spear with a single finger. Releasing the power of the divine beast, he knocked him down instantly. At that moment, his price at the auction exceeded 300 gold coins. Suddenly, a man nearby chuckled and bet 800 gold coins. Determined not to panic, the girl added 10 gold coins to the bid, but the man didn't back down and the bet skyrocketed to 1,200 gold coins, while Cal meanwhile summoned the golden sword of Goliath. Fortunately, no one around recognized what kind of weapon it was. But the guy next to him seemed to understand the play and raised the bet even more. With agile sword movements, the young man quickly finished off his opponent. Katisha, for her part, won the auction, buying Akal for 2,000 gold coins. But a second later, soldiers from the white cult appeared in the sky, confronting them. The boy smashed the teleportation circles at lightning speed. After this, he descended effortlessly toward his new mistress. The owner of the building was in his office, counting the bills. The heroine entered, demanding the key to Akal's chains. The man couldn't believe that a brat had won the auction. But everything was legal, and he had no choice but to hand over the key. Watching the girl leave, he noticed a strange kitten on her shoulder. As soon as she stepped out onto the street, Katisha took off running. She knew they could find them. The bandits were looking for them everywhere. Where could they go? Tired of running nonstop, the heroine felt her strength abandoning her. Meanwhile, the auction man arrived at the owner's office. The room was empty, and footsteps could be heard from the hallway during a chase. The stranger was surprised that the young Blasco heiress had escaped already. He knew that taming the divine beast and direct descendant of the Lord of Snow was not easy. The man decided to leave Akal in the girl's hands for now. What would come of this? And at that instant, the Duke saw Katisha exhausted and ran toward her. His sons were also restless and wanted to know how she was. Lucius was surprised at how calm the protagonist seemed despite the kidnapping. Seeing that all her friends had come for her, the girl was excited. The Duke immediately ordered that everyone involved be arrested. Katisha remembered that she owed money to her sister, who took her to the auction and let her go. Lucius was in shock and didn't understand what the hell she had been doing all night. At that moment, Akal purred in his dreams, and the girl took him out of the cloak. Seeing the divine beast sleeping peacefully in the protagonist's hands, the Duke was left speechless. No matter what happened, Katisha couldn't leave him at the auction. Lucius was furious to learn that the bandits found out about Akal and wanted to attract spectators with him. Suddenly, the girl expressed a strong desire to raise him herself. The Duke gave his approval. After all, she paid for him. But from this moment on, Little Orange wouldn't be able to step outside the mansion without his permission. Katisha didn't expect even the slightest sympathy from them, but such care was very touching. Later, she found herself sitting at a table with a meal laid out for 7 people. Katisha remembered that she owed money to her sister, who took her to the auction and let her go. Lucius was in shock and couldn't understand what the hell he had been doing all night. At that moment, Akal purred in his sleep and the girl pulled him out from the cloak. Seeing the divine beast sleeping peacefully in the protagonist's hands, the Duke was left speechless. No matter what happened, Katisha couldn't leave him at the auction. Lucius was furious to learn that the bandits found out about Akal and wanted to attract spectators with him. Suddenly, the girl expressed a strong desire to raise him herself. The Duke gave his approval. After all, she paid for him. But from this moment on, the Little Orange couldn't step outside the mansion without his permission. Katisha didn't expect even the slightest sympathy from them, but such care was very touching. Later, she found herself sitting at a table with a meal set for 7 people. It turned out that Margaret Rosa and Sibyl had gone to the underground training center, a prison camp for criminals, where they served their punishment for not having protected the girl well. Before sleeping, the protagonist decided that Akal should maintain his beast form so that no one would know his true identity. After transforming ostentatiously into a young man, he much preferred the human form. Since his body hadn't fully grown yet, he felt uncomfortable. In the form of a kitten anyway, Akal was sincerely grateful that his sister rescued him. The protagonist believed that since he was younger, he should address her with more respect. It turns out the divine beast was already 50, and 1 year old, he and those of his class could transform into adults instantly, so Katisha decided that he could simply call her by her name, and Cal was very happy to meet her. Next to the window, who would he have to kill today, he wanted to hear if he remembered correctly now among his duties, was to protect the girl caught in confusion. The protagonist recalled out loud the name of Sibyl and Cal, prepared to jump through the window. But Katisha threw a pillow at him. We shouldn't have rushed. We could have watched that boy first if he didn't act alone, obviously. So we must punish them all together. Fortunately, it wasn't hard to convince the young man with words. Before this, he protected the cult. For 5 years, and it became his mission. Protecting someone was his reason to live, and the meaning to die. Suddenly, the girl noticed a scar on Akal's neck not mentioned in the novel. In the novel, Blasco was absolute evil, and Honey and the White Colt were the true good. However, now, everything has turned upside down. The heroine wanted the divine beast to be not only her protector, but also a friend. And Cal surprisingly accepted this quick and warmly agreeing to be friends. Wishing her sweet dreams, Katisha hoped that tomorrow he would return to being a kitten. The young man lay down beside her, because as a true friend, he didn't want to move away even a step. Then the heroine decided to warn him that he could wake up at any moment from an accidental kick. After a few hours, Katisha woke up from the intense light upon seeing that the pendant was open. She was puzzled for a second. Then she teleported to the room with the novel. Now the continuation of the story was available, and the cautious heroine continued reading the next morning. The Duke held a meeting with his children. The rumor about Lady Ainsley was likely spreading from the places where she lived with her grandfather. Now it was impossible to guarantee that the kidnapping wouldn't happen again. Arnon decided that the best thing for the girl was to adopt soon the Blasco surname, so she could take advantage of family protection. It would be great to move the exam schedule forward and lower the difficulty. Ludius recalled Catilla's words yesterday about the keys to the safe. Perhaps Sybil had them, but when meeting and searching that guy, he didn't find the key. The Duke decided to start by changing the girl's supervisor and depriving Chen of the import of magical crystals. At the same time, Ludius wanted to observe their actions. Werner remained silent and apparently didn't want to intervene during the exam to make everything fair. Besides, he didn't understand, since when Arnon cared so much about the little one, did he soften up like that after receiving the bribe? In the form of the sword from the safe, the children began arguing again, which caused his lordship to have a headache. The girl understood her brother's indifference towards Katisha. He didn't even speak to her well. Werner had no way to respond. If he even confused her with a maid and said everything in the end, the Duke couldn't take it anymore and decided to find out. Before whom they dared to raise their voices, the air test would be conducted as planned, and there was no room for cheating. In it, Arning understood that his conclusions were hasty, but he didn't want to expose the heroine to unnecessary danger. For that reason, Lucius decided that from now on, the girl would only leave the house in the company of one of them. After that, he headed towards the Little Orange, accompanied by Jamian and Keith. It turned out that Katisha had been crying since last night, and there was no way to calm her. None of the servants could understand what was happening. The Duke approached her with a handkerchief and decided to find out everything for himself. He wiped her face mercilessly and ordered them to prepare water for washing after all. He wondered if she had such a horrible nightmare. One of the maids thought that a walk outdoors would do her good. At first, Ludius refused, but in the end, he didn't know how he ended up with her in the garden. Ikal bid his lordship And Katisha scolded him immediately. The Duke saw that she was not herself and didn't understand what he could do for her. He took the girl to the hall with the collections restored by his ancestors. Suddenly, the protagonist felt an enormous urge to see one of the paintings. Her bright eyes and childish innocence made Lucius feel nostalgic. He picked her up and Katisha pointed with her finger at the painting she considered a masterpiece. It turned out to be a portrait of the very Duke. The painting looked very old, but Lucius hadn't changed a thing, which puzzled him a bit. The Duke smiled and remembered that in that portrait he was only 27 years old. The girl found it hard to believe that now all of that belonged to her. Then they decided to go to the garden, and Lucius sent the protagonist ahead as soon as she disappeared behind the doors. He burned that painting without hesitation. Later, Ikal noticed that Katisha's eyes were very swollen from crying. The girl didn't respond at all, and just wanted to sort her thoughts. In the new episode, she read that Katisha Ainsley died in the original novel. She wouldn't even reach 11 years old, which meant there was very little time left, and Cal began to shout and accuse Niella of lying also about Katisha. The protagonist in turn decided that she needed to calm down, since she was losing her mind. Although inside she didn't understand when she realized all of this. The boy had noticed strange things before, but he didn't imagine that she wanted to deceive them all. Recap Manhwa. Nor did she sacrifice the divine beast for her ambitions, and even had the audacity to come back here grabbing her by the neck. Ikal hoped she was ready to pay. For her arrogance, the episode ended there, and Katisha didn't understand absolutely anything that was happening. Besides, she would soon have to die. But the protagonist was still not prepared at all, and Cal sat down beside her in human form and wanted to know who had hurt the girl. He didn't resemble his future self in the novel from what we saw. He was devastated by Katisha's death. In the original novel in this world, she saved him, not Niella. So the events must change. Looking into his eyes, the heroine wished that he wouldn't allow her to die, and Cal saw no reason to worry, and was ready to protect her always. After that night, 10 days flew by. The divine kitten simply didn't want to play with the girl in the garden, and all because yesterday she crushed him while he slept. Katisha decided to remind him that playing with her was his job. Suddenly, she found out that she had been assigned the second task of the exam upon hearing the summary of Jamian's challenge. The girl turned pale with terror. After that, she met with the Duke and Chen in the hall of the Blasco mansion. Lucius hoped that the man would remember that the girl was only turning 10 this year. Chen considered age just a number and was sure she would make it. She just needed to survive a few days in the Savannah. That place is full of wild beasts and demons as well as undead. The man considered it the ideal place. For the second test, the Duke didn't want to hear that nonsense since everyone has their talents and one cannot be judged just by physical strength. At that moment, the protagonist raised her hand and accepted to carry out that mission. Chen smiled with satisfaction and decided to end the conversation there. He thought that Katisha in the Savannah would be even more fun than his son in the dungeon. The girl politely thanked for the advice and decided to show who would be expelled from the family. Now she needed to prepare properly, and Cal decided it would be enough for him to simply go with her. He doubted that the heroine trusted him, but she assured him otherwise. Now he had to wait a bit. While she sneaked out to run errands, however, the divine beast didn't want to part even for a second, but Katisha couldn't take the protagonist of the novel to the room where the novel was a new chapter. Opened after she learned she would be the heiress, and the next when she took a call. Then a new episode opens when she takes what should belong to Niella. After reviewing several chapters, the heroine found information about the protagonist's entrance exam. Most likely in the Savannah, they would attack her immediately and prevent her from taking the exam. That's why a plan was needed that would allow her not only to defend herself, but also to counterattack in time. Arnon was very outraged, thinking that the little one wouldn't last even a day there. Werner was considering including some special point to give her water or food. The Duke, for his part, decided to lift the restriction on weapons and objects she could take with her. It turned out that Katisha also wanted to add a special clause to the contract: 3 days. Later, Ludius handed her the modified rules. She had to live for 7 days in the Savannah and passing through 2 stops. Reach the final point in case of emergency. The participant can request help from the supervisors outside the Savannah. Fortunately, the contract stipulated her special condition: she could choose an additional supervisor. She understood it was a great advantage, and surely the Duke worked hard to get it. Katisha felt warmth in her heart. For being taken care of so much, Arnon in the meantime had made a danger detector, especially for her. Besides, the girl prepared for her a glove with a poisonous stinger at the tip. The heroine was surprised to learn that Arnon even managed to cast a triple protective spell. This technique was considered the most complex, and even in the original story, the girl never managed to master it. Arnon was grateful to the girl for the gifts from the safe that were of great help. Katisha was eager to open a joint business with her and split the profits 10 to 90, extending a spear towards her. The Duke's daughter was willing to split the profits in half if the heroine successfully exited the Savannah at first. Katisha wanted to propose that she be the manager, but her conscience didn't allow her, so she decided to try her luck. With Bernard, the boy wondered who the girl would choose to help her. Katisha smiled playfully. And remembered there was a handsome and outstanding member of the Blasco family deciding that it definitely wasn't him. Werner began to shuffle options from the secondary families. Besides, he gifted the heroine a stone that would teleport him to her in case of need. The girl was incredibly happy to receive such a gift. In that case, she decided to appoint a knight from the Blasco family named Lucius. She wanted him to keep a close eye on the wizards who run the Savannah in the story. Sir Lucius was a secondary character, but an important knight. Not even Aniela showed intentions either good or bad. The knight gladly accepted to protect the young lady. He was blank because Jerson had saved his life once. And now it was an honor for Lucius to take care of the heiress to the throne approved by the late Duke Manhwa. The next day, all the preparations were ready, and Katisha stood in front of the entrance to the Savannah.